Verek Alden sat at the edge of his ship's command deck, staring out into the vastness of space. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the worn armrest of his pilot seat, a habit he'd picked up after years of flying solo through hostile territories. The stars shimmered like distant promises, but Verek knew better than to trust the quiet. A beeping sound pierced the silence, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a distress signal, but not from any human settlement. Verek leaned forward and glanced at the holodisplay. The frequency was one he recognized, Virothi, his allies, a peaceful, intelligent race that had no aptitude for war. He sighed deeply. His instincts told him this would be more than a routine rescue. "Verek, it's time," he muttered to himself, standing up and pulling on his weathered jacket. His ship, the Stellar Warden, hummed to life as he set course for the coordinates. The Virothi had always been peaceful, relying on diplomacy and intellect to navigate the universe's dangers. But recently, a ruthless race known as the Krail had begun encroaching on their territory, enslaving their people, and now, it seemed, abducting their children. The comms crackled with static as a familiar voice came through. "Verek, this is Counselor Zyra. We need your help. They've taken the children. We don't know how many. You're our only hope." Verek gripped the controls tightly. Zyra's voice trembled, something he had never heard before from the usually composed counselor. It chilled him to the core. "I'm on my way, Zyra," he replied, his voice steady, but beneath the surface he felt the weight of what was to come. As the Stellar Warden approached the Virothi homeworld, Verek could see the Krail ships hovering like vultures over a dying animal. The Krail had already begun their invasion. Smoke rose from several cities on the planet's surface. His heart pounded as he descended through the atmosphere. He had fought many battles, but this was different. This wasn't about him or some strategic objective. This was about the lives of innocent children. Verek landed in a secluded area, well away from the battle-ridden zones. As the hatch opened, the stench of burning metal and smoke filled his lungs. The air was thick with the tension of imminent danger. Zyra met him at the landing zone, her pale Virothi skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her eyes, large and luminous, conveyed more worry than words ever could. "They took them north," she said, her voice shaking. "Our forces. We couldn't hold them back." Verek nodded, grabbing his gear, a blaster, a few plasma grenades, and his worn-out knife. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but old habits were hard to shake. "I'll get them back," he promised, locking eyes with Zyra. "I need intel. Their stronghold, weak points, anything." Zyra hesitated before nodding. "There's a Krail command ship stationed in orbit over the northern hemisphere. That's where they're holding the children. But Verek, the Krail aren't like anyone you've faced before." "Doesn't matter," Verek said, checking his weapon. "They're not leaving this planet with those kids." The Krail were known for their brutality. A nomadic race of warlords and slavers, they had no concept of mercy. Verek had encountered them once before during his time in the military, but back then he had an entire squad to back him up. Now it was just him. The journey north was perilous. Krail patrols roamed the skies, their dark, angular ships swooping low, scanning for any signs of resistance. Verek moved quickly and quietly, keeping to the shadows, relying on his years of survival training. The terrain grew harsher, with jagged rocks and deep ravines, but Verek pressed on, driven by the image of the terrified Virothi children in his mind. As night fell, he reached a Krail outpost. It was heavily guarded, but that didn't deter him. Verek wasn't here to fight the whole army, just to find a way in. He observed from a distance, noting the rotation of the guards, the weak points in their patrol patterns. The Krail were arrogant, and that would be their downfall. Varek slipped through the perimeter unnoticed, his movements silent, deadly. Inside the camp, he could hear the cries of the children, locked in cages, surrounded by Krail soldiers. His jaw tightened as he moved closer, using the cover of darkness to his advantage. He had to act fast. If the Krail caught wind of his presence, they would kill the children without a second thought. With a swift, practiced motion, he incapacitated 2 guards with his blade, their bodies crumpling soundlessly to the ground. Varek reached the cages, where the wide-eyed Virothi children huddled together. Their glowing eyes reflected the fear they felt, but there was also a glimmer of hope as they saw him. "Stay quiet," he whispered, working on the locks. "We're getting out of here." The plan was simple: cause enough chaos to distract the Krail and escape with the children before reinforcements arrived. It wasn't foolproof, but Varek had learned long ago that improvisation was a soldier's best friend. He planted several plasma grenades at key locations around the camp, setting them on a delayed timer. As he led the children through the shadows, the first explosion rocked the ground, followed by another and another. The Krail scrambled, caught off guard by the sudden assault. Smoke and fire filled the air as Varek guided the children toward his ship, staying low and out of sight. But the Krail weren't stupid. They quickly realized what was happening and began to pursue. Blaster fire streaked across the sky as Varek and the children ran, the sound of heavy boots closing in on them. One of the children stumbled, and Varek scooped them up without hesitation, his legs burning with exertion. The Stellar Warden was in sight, but so were the Krail reinforcements. Varek set the child down, pulled out his blaster, and turned to face the oncoming soldiers. He couldn't let them get any closer. "Not now. Get on the ship," he shouted to the children as he fired, each shot precise, taking down the Krail soldiers one by one. But more were coming. Too many. The children scrambled aboard, and Varek backed toward the ship, still firing. Just as he was about to board, a Krail captain appeared, larger and more imposing than the others. The 2 locked eyes, and in that moment, Varek knew he was in for a fight. The captain lunged, swinging a massive energy blade. Varek barely dodged, his heart racing as the blade scorched the ground where he had been standing. He fired his blaster, but the captain deflected the shots with ease. Varek ducked under another swing, rolling to his feet and pulling his knife. This fight would be close, brutal, and unforgiving, and Varek had no intention of losing. The Krail captain's energy blade hissed through the air as it sliced down toward Varek. He barely managed to sidestep, feeling the heat of the weapon graze his arm. Pain flared up, but Varek couldn't afford to slow down. He had to end this fast. There were too many Krail soldiers converging on the Stellar Warden. The children needed to be off this planet before reinforcements arrived. The Krail captain snarled, his towering form casting a shadow over Varek. His blade swung again, and this time Varek ducked low, rolling behind a crate for cover. The captain's strength was undeniable, but his movements were predictable. He relied on brute force, not finesse. Varek had dealt with that before. As the captain closed in, Varek pulled a plasma grenade from his belt, activating the timer and tossing it in the Krail's direction. The explosion rocked the ground, throwing the captain off balance, but not taking him out. He staggered, his armor scorched but intact. Varek didn't give him time to recover. He sprinted forward, closing the gap in an instant. With a fluid motion, he drove his knife into the captain's exposed side, right between the armor plates. The Krail roared in pain, swinging wildly as he tried to dislodge the blade. But Varek was faster. He twisted the knife, pulling it free and stepping back before the captain could retaliate. The Krail's body wavered, his grip on the energy blade weakening. Varek moved in for the final blow, a single clean strike that severed the power core on the captain's armor. Sparks flew, and the Krail fell to his knees, collapsing in a heap of smoldering metal. Varek wiped the sweat from his brow and took a deep breath. There was no time to celebrate. He could hear the pounding footsteps of more Krail soldiers approaching. He turned and ran for the Stellar Warden, his legs burning from the exertion. The children were already aboard, huddled together in the cargo hold, their wide, glowing eyes watching him with a mix of fear and hope. Varek slammed the hatch shut and rushed to the cockpit. His hands flew across the controls as he powered up the engines. The Krail were almost on top of them. The ship lifted off the ground just as blaster fire erupted around them. The Krail soldiers were trying to shoot them out of the sky, but Varek was ready. He pulled the ship into a steep climb, banking hard to the left to avoid the incoming fire. The Stellar Warden shot through the atmosphere, shaking as it broke free of the planet's gravity. Varek glanced at the scanners. Krail ships were in pursuit. Their sleek, angular forms cut through space with terrifying speed, closing in on them fast. "Hold on," Varek muttered to himself, fingers flying across the controls as he plotted a course for the nearest warp gate. The Krail were ruthless, but Varek had one advantage. They were predictable. As the enemy ships closed in, Varek waited, watching the scanners, his pulse steady despite the chaos. The Krail lined up for an attack, their weapons powering up.
Come on, come on.
Varek whispered, gripping the throttle. At the last second, he cut the engines, allowing the Stellar Warden to drop suddenly. The Krail ships overshot, their attack missing by a fraction of a second. Varek slammed the throttle forward again, engaging the engines and veering sharply to the right, leaving the enemy in his wake. But the Krail weren't giving up. More ships appeared on the scanners, cutting off their escape route. Varek cursed under his breath. He was outnumbered, and even his piloting skills could only buy them so much time. In the cargo hold, the children huddled together, their glowing eyes wide with terror. One of the older Virothi boys, no more than 12, stepped forward hesitantly. "Will we make it?" he asked, his voice trembling. Varek didn't turn around. "I won't let anything happen to you. Just sit tight." But he knew the odds weren't in their favor. The Krail ships were faster and better armed. If they caught up, it would be a slaughter. Varek's eyes flicked to the warp gate in the distance. It was their only hope. If they could reach it, they could escape to a neutral zone, a place where the Krail wouldn't dare follow. But the gate was still minutes away, and the Krail ships were closing the gap. He needed a plan, something bold, something that would throw the Krail off balance. Varek's eyes darted to the ship's external systems display. He still had a few plasma charges left. Not enough to destroy the Krail ships, but enough to cause some chaos. A grim smile tugged at his lips. "All right, let's see how much they like surprises." He set the ship to autopilot and sprinted to the rear bay. Opening the external hatch just wide enough, Varek lobbed out the remaining plasma charges, setting them on a proximity fuse. As he closed the hatch and returned to the cockpit, the charges detonated in sequence. The Krail ships, caught off guard by the sudden explosions, veered off course. It wasn't much, but it bought Varek the time he needed. The warp gate loomed closer, its swirling energy field a beacon of salvation. Varek pushed the Stellar Warden to its limits, the ship groaning under the strain. The Krail was still behind them, but they were too far back to stop what was about to happen. With a final surge of speed, the Stellar Warden shot through the warp gate. The universe around them twisted and distorted, and for a moment everything went silent. When they emerged on the other side, Varek let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The Krail ships hadn't followed. They were safe. For now. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye. See you in the next story.